Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 1st of December of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. The Western countries, the NATO countries, the United States of America, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and many other countries began open confrontation with the Russian Federation. Currently, we have several places, hot points for Russia, not just for Russia, but on the territories of Russia's interests. The main activities are taking place in the small state in Caucasus by the name of Georgia. And according to information we have, there are very powerful and huge strikes and the protests on the territory of the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi. People came on streets demanding the current authorities to withdraw their positions and to start new elections and to use and to follow pro-European and pro-NATO path of integration. But currently, the current Prime Minister of Georgia is a pro-Russian person, and recently he denied the European integration. And after this deny, the protests started. Currently, there are very difficult situation in the territory of Georgia. The Western countries promised to sanction Georgia if they continue suppressing the free will of its population. Another attack, another place of activities, another place of Russia's interest is Syria, and several days ago Western countries controlling the proxy Turkey forces began the significant offensive operation deep inside of the territory of Syria. And as a result of clashes during the previous 3-4 days, the rebels managed to improve their position significantly and to capture the significant number of territories. As for the end of the 1st of December, the proxy Turkish and proxy Western forces were stopped or at least slowed down by the Syrian Russia-Iran coalition. But when talking about the way how the rebels were attacking, it reminds me the way how the Ukrainians were attacking the territory of Russia in the Sudzha direction. So the rebels were sending the mobile groups, mobile soldiers and units as deep as possible inside of the territory of Syria with the purpose to block upcoming reinforcements that was sent or was planned to send by the Assad forces. So as you can see, according to the geolocations, the rebels managed to reach at least this line and to block the pro-Assad forces that were planning to move in the direction of Aleppo with the purpose to stabilize the situation there. As for now, it's very early to adjust the map in anyone's favor because once again, the rebels are using the same tactics as the Ukrainians were using in Sudzha. It's better to wait for a little bit, and most likely in a day, in a week, probably, or in a week or in two, we're gonna see the real line of combat contact, and only after the Syrian forces, the Syrian Russia-Iranian coalition begins counteroffensive, probably this line is going to be the base, and this is the line is going to be the turning point. Also, we have reports that the Syrian army retreated. Yes, we know this for sure. They didn't show any resistance. The Syrian army decided to save personnel, to save as many as possible soldiers, to regroup them, to equip them, and then to counterattack. But we continue receiving reports that the Kurds forces in the northern part of Aleppo are holding their positions. Maybe they will retreat as well during the next several days, but as for now, they're trying to hold the lines, trying not to give the rebels to take under control their territories. As for the southern direction, we are talking about the progress of the rebels in the direction of Hama. This progress was also stopped or at least slowed down by the Russian-Syrian coalition, and most likely starting of tomorrow, the Syrian army will start counteroffensive. Now we need to understand what is the main purpose, what is the main purposes and tasks of rebels in this offensive, in this stage of the Syrian civil war. Obviously not to take the entire Syria under complete control. Obviously not to carry out the military coup and to change Bashar Assad for somebody else. Obviously, to me at least, the main purpose of the Syrian offensive operation, rebels rebels' offensive operation is to slow down the Russians everywhere. So to force the Russians to invest and to send a significant number of forces, aviation, missiles, rockets, bombs on the territory of Syria with the purpose to stabilize the area. And if Russia does this, then of course it will make the Russians less powerful on the territory, for example, of Ukraine, because now the Russians need to use the same resources to control the situation in Georgia by the special forces. Now the Russians need to send forces in the territory of Syria with the purpose to stabilize the line. Now the Russians need to think how to continue the special military operation, and they know that obviously all these things are not the end. During the next several months, most likely we're going to see the significant escalation from the Western countries, because there are two more weak points in Russian area of influence. The first, probably the most important problem, is the territory of Transnistria. As I understand, as for me, now is the perfect time for Ukraine to begin the offensive operation in the direction of Transnistria with the purpose to restore the territorial integrity of Romania, of Moldova, and to allow, which will give the Moldovians the possibility, first of all, to join NATO, and the second thing, to join European Union. And another thing, that Zelensky will be able to get access probably to military warehouses and bases that are located on the territory of Transnistria. So this is possible next direction that the Western countries are going to use, and we need to understand that this is not going to happen in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. The Western countries have just 2 months when Donald Trump comes to his power, so that's why they need to act right now. Another important thing, let's say, weak point of Russia is Republic of Belarus. In January of 2025, there are going to be president elections on the territory of this state, let's say on the border between NATO and Russian Federation. And most likely the Western countries will begin provocations in these countries as well, as it was in 2020 and several years ago. Most likely the Western countries will make lots of provocations with the purpose to, let's say, force people to protest, or maybe to begin some provocations on the border with the Belarusian nationalist forces that had been trained on the territory of Ukraine during the special military operation and on the territory of Poland. So obviously the next 2 months are going to be very difficult. On the other hand, the Russians increased their military budget. Putin approved record spending on the Russian defense in 2025. The amount is over 145 billion, the current budget on the 2024, and this is 32.5 of the entire budget of the country. 145 billion is the budget on the 2025. The budget used to be 11 trillions of rubles. It's maybe 100, let's say 20 billion, so much less in comparison with the current year, which means that the Russians are not going to stop the special military operation. The Russians will support Syria. The Russians will continue following the situation in Georgia. The Russians will not allow provocations on the territory of Belarus, and I can't even tell you what exactly the Russians are able to do if Ukrainians decide to attack Transnistria. This is the vital moment for Russia. This is the turning point for Russia, when we're going to receive the answer whether the Russians are going to become a supreme state, or the Russians will not be able to handle with every single direction. And of course, if it happens, we might see very, very huge problems in Russia in the next decade. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about the Zaporozhye, South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation, trying to encircle the city of Velika Novoselova from the south, east and north. According to different mappers, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the southeastern direction of the village of Velika Novoselova. Let's take a look at the map, at how the map was changing. This is the situation by the end of the 30th of November. This is by the end of the 1st of December. As you can see, the Russians improved their position significantly. And from this perspective, we can make a conclusion that the next target, and maybe the Russians already began assault operation towards the village of Blagodatne, and maybe in the south, in the direction of the southern outskirts of Velika Novoselova itself. This is very important and powerful operation. If the Russians are able to take these territories under control, this can lead to significant problems for the Ukrainians. Another important updates are coming from the northern flank, from the northern pincer, from the northern axis, and according to information we have, the Russians this morning began the offensive operation in the direction of Novokamar, and the sources reported, pro-Russian sources reported, that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter the village itself. And later we have report from pro-Russian mappers, and they reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to enter the village of Novokamar and to dig in deeper. So summarizing everything, according to pro-Russian sources, currently the Russians established complete control over this territory, which is very huge progress of the Russian forces, and this is the significant progress, telling the truth, because from this perspective we see that Ukrainians lost almost every single supply road they used to have, for example, even yesterday, and now the Ukrainians have just one supply road that goes between the village of Velika Novoselovka and further in the western directions towards the village town by the name of Gulay Pole. But the problem is that this road is unsecured. To use this road is very risky. It's too risky, too dangerous for the Ukrainians, because I expect that if the Russians indeed entered the village of Novokamar, this one, then most likely the upcoming days the Russians will begin another offensive operation in the direction of this road with the purpose to cut this road physically. If it happens, then we can start talking about the complete collapse of the Velika Novoselovka, with the very high chances that Ukrainians that are located in the territory of the settlement would be caught in cauldron. Very difficult situation for the Ukrainians, and it's very difficult to understand where the Ukrainians are planning to stop the Russians if Velika Novoselovka falls. Now let's talk about the Uspenovka fortified area. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Ilinka. We have a video that confirm and show us how the Russians raised the flag in the most western part of the settlement. This is not the Russian flag, this is just the flag of unit that was attacking the territory of Ilinka. And later we got the Minister of Defense reporting, according to the Russians, as a result of active offensive operation, units of the Group of Forces South managed to establish complete control over the settlement. Currently there are very heavy clashes right now for the territory of the village by the name of Yelizavetovka, and most likely tomorrow the Russians will either show us or both show us the video with the Russian flag, or the Minister of Defense will confirm this, and after that the battle for the main stronghold is going to start. Now let's move further and let's talk about the city of Kurakhove. The Russians managed to cross the turning point. Now they control the initiative completely. For example, in this video we can see the Russians that were raising the flag above the school number 5. This is the central part. The area was completely secured. The Russians continue advancing. They managed to capture the significant number of Ukrainian soldiers. Furthermore, the Russians managed to block the Yuzhny micro district. Most likely the Ukrainians that are currently located on the territory of this high-rise building area either will retreat these upcoming nights between the 2nd and the 1st and the 2nd of December, or they would be caught in cauldron by the Russians. Now let's talk about the northern Kurakhove direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of very interesting updates from different mappers. The pro-Ukraine mappers, pro-Russian resources, pro-neutral mappers reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to defeat the Ukrainians to the northwest of Berestki. The Russians were moving along the Kakhovka-Kurakhove water reservoir, and as a result of offensive, the Russians entered the village of Stary Tirny itself, and according to several Russian resources, including very reliable, the Russians managed to take under control the village completely. Most likely tomorrow we're gonna start receiving first videos. If this information is correct, then something like this is already we can see on the territory of this direction. Most likely the artillery pocket that's located between the village of Solntsevka and Stara Tirna itself. We're talking about this territory has already collapsed, and most likely this upcoming night the Ukrainians also will try to retreat from this area in the direction of the village by the name of Shevchenka. As you can see, the situation for the Ukrainians is very critical, and if the information about Stara Tirna is correct, then most likely the Russians will continue moving in the southern direction with the purpose to answer the village of Dachne. This is going to be a very difficult operation, but obviously the village of Dachne wasn't prepared, is not ready to meet the Russians from the north, because the Ukrainians didn't have enough of time to create additional fortifications or layered fortifications. If the Russians take under control the village of Dachne, then we can say that the entire Kurakhove direction collapsed completely. Now let's move further to the western Selidovo area. The Russians continue advancing in the direction of the village by the name of Pushkina, and right before we start making the video, the first sources reported that the village was captured by the Russians, and probably tomorrow we will change this map in Russian favor. Furthermore, the Russians, according to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, managed to secure the village of Petrovka. We have the icon about this, and we start receiving updates that the first and the sabotage and edge sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of Russian Federation answered the territory of the village by the name of Novopustinka. As for the changes on the ground, we also have several, and this is the situation. This is how the map been changing for the previous several days. The Russians are pushing, and as for this operational task, the main purpose for the Russians is to take the village of Novotroitsk under complete control. If the Russians are able to take this settlement under control, this will allow the Russians to secure their western flank, and then the Russians will continue moving further along the railways in the direction of the village by the name of Shevchenka. If Shevchenka falls, then this is going to be the beginning of the Pokrovsk offensive operation, and the first task of possible Pokrovsk offensive operation is going to be to divide into the area, to divide Mirnograd and Pokrovsk in two different separate directions. For these purposes, the Russians need to continue moving along the railways until they get the fields between two strongholds, between two cities. If the Russians are able to do this, then we can start counting days before Mirnograd falls. The Russians will resume their offensive from Grodovka at the same time in the direction of the settlement itself. So, and this, all these things that we just discussed might happen probably in the late December or early January. Now let's move further. As for the Chasiv Yar and the Toretsk direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, just one small video from the forest to the south of the citadel of Chasiv Yar. In this video we can see the Russian stormtroopers that were heading towards another stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine. This video was geolocated exactly in this point, and most likely the Russians were moving in the direction of this forest, because this forest is the well-fortified area that's currently under complete Ukraine control. As for the Sivers direction, during the previous 24 hours we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in this direction. I'll remind you that somewhere around a months ago the Russians replaced the commander of this direction. Another person arrived with a completely different approach, and we see that the new commander began using new approach in this direction. First he was bombing logistic roads, bridges, communications. Now he is trying to focus the Ukrainian positions, strongholds, machine gun positions. All these things means that maybe in the very near future the Russians will begin offensive operation, let's say in the direction of Verkhnekamensk, Grigorovka, or the Russians will try to outflank the city of Siversk from the southwest, trying to improve their positions and attacking in the direction of the village by the name of Riznikovka. If the Russians are able to do this, then we can start counting days for the entire Siversk area. The southern Kupiansk direction, nothing special. The central Kupiansk direction, nothing special. The northern Kupiansk direction, we continue receiving reports about the Russian footholds on the Ukrainian side of the river Voskol. This is very important piece of news, and if the Russians are able to take the village of Dvorichne in pincers, and this is exactly what the Russians are trying to do, then this is going to be a very critical situation, not just for the Ukrainians in the city of Kupiansk, because from this foothold the Russians will be able to outflank the city of Kupiansk from behind, but to my opinion, most likely the Russians from Dvorechna is going to start moving in the direction of the city of Ovchansk, trying to attack the Ukrainians from behind. And the main purpose of this attack is to restore control over the territories that the Russians lost during the Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive operation of 2022. And most likely this is exactly what the Russians are trying to achieve. As for the Sudzha direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, just regular videos from the area of Kruglinka. In this video we can see the significant concentration of Ukrainian forces. The Russians are currently the main task of the Russians. The Russians are tasked to take under control this forest. This is the last forest before the beginning of the different villages. As you can see, after these forests there are no more forests, there are just villages, water reservoirs, lakes, and then the city of Sudzha itself. So this is the final natural stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine. If the Russians are able to clean this forest, to take this forest under control, then it's going to be much more easier for the Russians to advance in the direction of Sudzha itself. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.